He never thought he'd see the sun rise again and feel anything at all. The sidewalk had become his bed, the streetlight his only lamp, and the steady hum of passing cars his lullaby. His name was Daniel, but to most, he was simply that homeless guy outside the gas station. Forgotten, disregarded, invisible. The world moved past him every day, and he moved with it in silence, in shadows. His dreams had packed up and left long ago, and all that remained was the soft murmur of regrets that clung to him like the old, tattered jacket he wore every day. Life had not always been like this. Once he was someone. He had a job, a home, laughter echoing in his living room, and the scent of his wife's favorite lavender candle floating through the air. But all of that had disappeared, as though it were a scene from a movie where the reel had burned out. First came the job loss, then the medical bills, and finally, the unbearable silence after she left and never came back. It wasn't just her absence that hollowed him out. It was the loss of identity. He wasn't Daniel anymore. He was a shadow, a ghost of someone he once knew. Most people crossed the street when they saw him. Some clutched their bags tighter. Others threw coins without looking. None of them saw his eyes. No one saw the pain behind them. The kind of pain that builds brick by brick until you're trapped inside a prison with no walls. He had become used to it, or so he told himself. Days bled into nights, and hope thinned like the soles of his shoes. And then, one cold winter morning, when his breath came out in pale clouds and his fingers refused to bend from the cold, something happened. It was subtle at first, just a sleek black car that pulled up across the street. He didn't think anything of it. People with money often came and went in this part of town, usually in a hurry, usually avoiding eye contact. But this car didn't just pass through, it stopped. The door opened and a man stepped out, not in a flashy way, but calm, quiet. He wore a beanie, sunglasses, and a simple jacket. Not the kind of outfit you'd expect from a celebrity, and certainly not enough to draw attention. Daniel looked away. He wasn't in the mood to be asked to move or get told off for being too close to a storefront. He braced himself for the usual, but instead he heard footsteps. Slow, steady, getting closer. "Hey man," a voice said, warm and casual. Daniel looked up, and for a second he couldn't believe it. The face was familiar. Too familiar. It wasn't just someone who looked like Robert Downey Jr., it was him. He blinked once, twice. Was this real? "You okay?" The man asked again, crouching down slightly so their eyes met. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. He didn't want to believe it. He'd hallucinated before. Hunger, cold, loneliness. They play tricks on the mind. Robert smiled softly. "I was driving by, saw you sitting here. Thought I'd say hello." Still no words. Daniel was stuck somewhere between disbelief and awe. Why would a man like this stop for someone like him? Robert sat down beside him, not too close, not too far. Just enough. "You want some coffee?" he asked, holding up a cup he'd picked up earlier. Daniel stared at it, then nodded. As he took the cup with trembling fingers, something shifted. It wasn't just the warmth of the drink that spread through him. It was the warmth of being seen. "Name's Robert," the man said, extending his hand. Daniel hesitated. Then slowly he shook it. "Daniel," he whispered. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." They sat in silence for a while. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that feels safe. And then Robert started to talk. Not about fame or movies or anything Hollywood. He spoke about pain, about mistakes, about nights spent on floors he didn't own and mornings where he didn't recognize the person in the mirror. He spoke of second chances that came only after he thought he'd lost everything. Daniel listened, and for the first time in years he didn't feel like the only broken man in the room. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," Robert said softly. "To think no one gives a damn if you wake up tomorrow or not." Daniel swallowed hard. "But I promise you," Robert continued, this isn't the end of your story." Something about the way he said it made Daniel believe it, just a little. "You hungry?" Robert asked, rising to his feet. Daniel nodded again slowly. Robert helped him up, not forcefully but with a gentle hand on his arm. They walked together to a nearby diner. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with warm lights and real food. Daniel hadn't been inside a place like that in months. He kept his eyes low, shoulders hunched, expecting stares or comments, but no one said a word. Maybe because they were with Robert, Or maybe because kindness makes people quiet in the best way. As they ate, Robert asked questions. Not the shallow kind, but real ones. What did you do before? Construction, Daniel replied. What happened? Life, he said with a small, sad smile. Robert nodded. He understood. They talked for over an hour, laughed a little, cried a little too. When they walked out, Robert didn't just say goodbye and drive off. He handed Daniel a card. This is my assistant's number. I want to help. Place to stay, food, clothes, and maybe some new beginnings. Daniel looked at the card like it was a golden ticket. But why? He asked, voice cracking. Robert looked him in the eye and said, because someone once did it for me. And now it's my turn. Daniel didn't sleep that night, not because of the cold or the noise of passing cars, but because of something far rarer, hope. A small, almost fragile hope that something good might actually happen. That maybe, just maybe, he wasn't doomed to spend his remaining years watching the world from the edge of a curb. He held that business card in his hand like it was sacred, a flimsy piece of paper that somehow felt heavier than all the pain he'd carried for so long. He stared at the name, the number, the clean white background. His thumb brushed over the ink again and again, as if trying to memorize the feel of it, to make sure it wouldn't disappear like everything else in his life had. Morning came and he still hadn't called. Fear clutched at his chest. What if it was all just a kind moment? Something said in the warmth of emotion. Never meant to be followed through? What if Robert Downey Jr. had already forgotten about him? He had seen it before. People with good intentions making promises they never planned to keep. A sandwich here, a few dollars there. Kind words that disappeared as quickly as they came. But still he held the card close. He needed to believe it was different this time. The sun was barely up when a black SUV rolled up beside him again. Daniel blinked, shielding his eyes from the headlights. The window rolled down, and to his disbelief, there he was. Robert again. You didn't call, Robert said, a small smile playing on his face. I didn't want to bother you, Daniel replied, ashamed. You wouldn't be, Robert said, stepping out of the car. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. It felt like stepping into a new world. The vehicle was warm, smelled like leather and something expensive Daniel couldn't name. But Robert talked to him like they were old friends catching up. Not like a millionaire driving a homeless man through the streets of LA. They pulled into a quiet neighborhood. Not Beverly Hills, not flashy. Just peaceful. The kind of place where birds sang and neighbors waved. Robert had arranged a guest house, small, simple, but beautiful. A bed, a bathroom, a kitchen. Daniel couldn't breathe for a second as he looked around. This is for me? He asked, voice barely audible. Robert nodded. As long as you need it. Tears slipped down Daniel's face before he could stop them. He turned away, embarrassed, but Robert placed a hand on his shoulder. There's no shame in crying, he said gently. I've cried more times than I can count. That night, Daniel took his first hot shower in years. He watched the dirt swirl down the drain, like old pain being washed away. He looked at himself in the mirror, really looked. The man staring back still had tired eyes, still carried years of sorrow. But there was something else too, a spark. The next morning, Robert came back with breakfast and clothes. You still good with your hands? He asked. Daniel nodded. I've got a friend who runs a construction company. He's always looking for good people. Told him about you. Daniel's heart raced. What did you tell him? That you're a fighter. That you've been through hell, but you're still standing. That you're worth taking a chance on. Daniel stared at the plate in front of him, steam rising from scrambled eggs. His throat tightened. No one's ever said that about me, he whispered. Well, someone should have, Robert replied. You're not invisible, Daniel. You matter. The following week was like a dream. Medical checkups arranged by Robert's assistant. Clean clothes, a haircut, even a prepaid phone. But most of all, time. Robert didn't just throw money at the problem. He showed up. Every few days he'd stop by. Sometimes just to chat, sometimes to listen. He never made Daniel feel small. He never treated him like a charity case. He treated him like a friend. The job came 2 weeks later. Manual work, but Daniel didn't mind. He welcomed the soreness in his muscles. It reminded him he was alive. The crew was kind, and though they didn't know his whole story, they respected the way he showed up every morning on time. and worked like his life depended on it, because in many ways it did. 3 months passed. The beard was trimmed now. His back stood a little straighter. He had a bank account, a routine, a purpose. And yet every time he passed that sidewalk where he used to sleep, a chill ran through him. It hadn't been that long ago. The concrete still remembered his weight. One evening, after a long day at work, Daniel found Robert waiting on the porch of the guest house. "Hey," Robert said with a smile. "You look like a man who earned himself a steak." Daniel chuckled. "I won't say no to that." They went to a quiet restaurant, low lights, warm colors, the kind of place where conversations mattered. Over dinner, Daniel finally asked the question that had haunted him. "Why me?" Robert looked at him for a moment, then leaned forward. "Because you remind me of myself," he said. "Before the fame, before Iron Man, there was a time I didn't think I was worth saving either. I spiraled. Addiction, prison, headlines, I was broken. But someone believed in me. Someone gave me a second chance when I didn't even ask for one." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "I see the same fire in you," Robert continued. "The same fight. And if I can be the person who helps you like someone once helped me, then that's all the legacy I'll ever need." It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him. Weeks turned into months. The guest house began to feel like a home. Daniel started helping at local shelters on weekends, talking to people still out on the streets, not from a place of pity but understanding. He knew what it was like to be hungry, scared, invisible. One night, after a volunteer shift, he found a small envelope tucked under his front door. Inside was a handwritten note. "Proud of you, R." And beneath it a set of keys. To a real apartment. Daniel cried for a long time that night, not out of sadness, but out of overwhelming gratitude. He had never imagined he'd live in a place with windows that let in morning light, with plants by the windowsill and a kitchen that smelled like coffee in the mornings. He called Robert. "You didn't have to do this," Daniel said, voice trembling. "I know," Robert replied, "but I wanted to. And more importantly, you earned it." There was a long pause. Then Robert added, "And maybe one day you'll do the same for someone else." Daniel looked around the small apartment, empty still but full of promise. "I will," he said softly, "I promise." The new apartment still smelled of fresh paint. The walls were a blank canvas waiting for the story of a man reborn. Daniel moved slowly through the space, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Each step was surreal. A real bed, not a bench. A working faucet. Light switches that responded to his touch. It was almost too much. A piece of him still waited to wake up under the cold sky, curled up beside a trash bin. But this was real, and every day it felt a little more real. He started small, buying dishes from the dollar store, folding clothes in drawers, placing a photo of his parents, the only possession he'd carried with him all these years, on the nightstand. The silence of the apartment was no longer deafening. It was peaceful. Daniel had come to treasure solitude again. But now it came with warmth, not loneliness. Robert visited often, sometimes bringing food, other times just sitting and chatting over tea. They laughed about everything, childhood memories, favorite movies, weird moments in life. And sometimes they sat in silence, sharing the comfort of knowing they didn't need words to fill the space. But perhaps the most unexpected thing to blossom from their connection was something deeper than gratitude. It was friendship. A friendship rooted not in charity but in truth. Both men had known what it felt like to fall. Both had known the shame of being broken in a world that never stops watching. And both had discovered the strength to rise again. It was late autumn when Daniel decided to make a move that would change everything, not just for himself, but for others like him. He stood outside a community center in East Los Angeles, nervously fidgeting with a folded piece of paper in his pocket. Inside, a small group of volunteers were setting up chairs and coffee. Daniel had called ahead, asking if he could speak at their upcoming outreach night for the homeless. He had never spoken in front of strangers before. But he had a story that no one else could tell quite like he could. When his name was called, Daniel stepped forward, heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. He looked at the dozen faces staring back at him, some tired, some skeptical, some hopeful, and then he spoke. He talked about the cold nights on the pavement, about the pain of being invisible, about the hunger that gnawed at his stomach and the loneliness that gnawed at his soul. He told them about losing everything, his job, his marriage, his identity. But then he told them about Robert, how a stranger with a famous face saw past the dirt and despair and chose to stop, to speak, to care. "I was a nobody," Daniel said, voice trembling. "And he made me feel like I was somebody again. Not because of what I could offer him, but because of what he saw in me." The room was silent. "I'm not saying everything was easy after that," he continued. "There were still hard days. I still wake up sometimes afraid I'll lose it all again. But I got a second chance. And I'm standing here to tell you, you deserve one too." A man in the back wiped a tear from his cheek. After the speech, people came up to him, some for hugs, others for advice. A few just stood silently beside him, soaking in the warmth of his presence. For the first time in his life, Daniel was a source of light. Not because he was perfect, but because he'd survived the dark. Word spread quickly about Daniel's story. A former homeless man who now volunteered at shelters, worked construction by day, and spoke hope into the hearts of others at night. A local reporter reached out to him, asking for an interview. Daniel was hesitant, but Robert encouraged him. "People need to hear this," he said. "You could change lives." The article ran in a Sunday edition, with the headline, "From Sidewalk to Second. Chances How One Man Found Hope Through an Unexpected Friend." The photo showed Daniel smiling shyly, standing in front of his small apartment, holding a mug of coffee. The article didn't focus on Robert. It focused on the power of compassion, the quiet strength of those who rebuild from the ruins. Soon after, a small nonprofit reached out, offering Daniel a part-time position, helping others transition from street life into temporary housing. It wasn't glamorous and the pay was modest, but it was meaningful work. Work that made his soul feel full. Robert visited him at the community center one evening, watching from the back as Daniel helped a young woman fill out her first job application in years. He had tears in his eyes as he watched. Later, Robert pulled him aside. "You're doing it," he said. "You're becoming the man I always knew you were." Daniel looked at him, heart swollen with emotion. "You gave me the chance." "No," Robert corrected him. "I opened a door. You walked through it." The next months flew by. Daniel moved from part-time to full-time at the nonprofit. He helped design a new mentorship program for recently housed individuals. He spoke at local colleges, churches, and city events. Each time he told his story, he healed a little more. Each time, someone in the audience walked away believing change was possible. One night after a fundraiser gala, Robert pulled Daniel aside again. "I want to do something," he said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I want to start something in your name," Robert continued. "A foundation. Something that lives on long after both of us. A place where stories like yours aren't rare, they're the norm." Daniel was speechless. "It would be yours to lead," Robert said. "I'll fund it." "You build it?" Daniel nodded slowly, a lump rising in his throat. "We'll call it the Second Chance Project." Robert smiled. "Perfect." The Second Chance Project started in a modest brick building on the east side of town. Nothing flashy, nothing huge, but it had something most places didn't: soul. The walls were painted with warm colors. The lobby had couches instead of plastic chairs. There were no metal detectors, no harsh fluorescent lights. It was a place where people could breathe again. A place where they were greeted with smiles instead of suspicion. And at the heart of it all was Daniel. He spent his mornings greeting people by name, shaking hands, remembering faces. His afternoons were spent in quiet one-on-one conversations, helping people navigate paperwork, find a meal, or just talk. But perhaps the most powerful moments were the ones when Daniel simply listened. No judgment, no rush, just presence. Robert showed up regularly, not to take the spotlight, but to support. He'd sit in the back of group meetings or stop by the kitchen to help serve lunch. No cameras, no press, just a man who cared. The staff had long stopped seeing him as a celebrity. He was just Robert now, just a friend. One rainy afternoon, Daniel sat in his small office staring out the window, watching water run down the glass in thin, crooked streams. A soft knock on the door broke his reverie. It was Anthony, a kid no older than 22, thin as a rail soaked from the storm. His shoes squished on the floor as he stepped inside. "You got a second?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Always." They sat. Anthony's hands trembled slightly. He looked like a candle almost burned out. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," he said. "I was on the streets for 2 years. Tried shelters, rehab, even church. Nothing stuck. Then I read about this place. I don't know why I came. Maybe I just wanted to see if someone would care." Daniel's throat tightened. He reached across the desk and set a hand gently on the kid's shoulder. "You made the right choice by walking through that door," he said. "Because now you're not alone." Anthony started crying. Not loud, just silent tears sliding down his cheeks. And Daniel let him. Let him grieve whatever he had to. Let him unburden without shame. That night, Daniel stayed late to help Anthony get into emergency housing. Made a few calls, found him a dry coat, even called a friend at a job training center. It reminded him of where he had started. It reminded him that no matter how far he came, this would always be his purpose. The Second Chance project grew faster than anyone had imagined. Word spread like wildfire, not just about its success rates, but about the way it made people feel safe, valued, seen. Other cities reached out. Donors called. Local businesses offered jobs to participants. It was working because it came from truth, not pity. It came from lived experience. One morning, Daniel stood in the main lobby and looked around. A woman cradled her newborn in a corner chair while filling out forms. 2 young men helped sweep the floor as part of their volunteer program. A group of high school students hung a banner that read, "You matter more than you know." And then in the doorway he saw Robert, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, no entourage, just a coffee in hand and that familiar half-smile. "You've created something incredible," Robert said softly. "We did," Daniel corrected him. They stood side by side for a long moment. 2 men who had both fallen, both risen, and both decided to use their scars to help others heal. Daniel turned to him. "I think about that night sometimes. When you stopped your car." Robert chuckled. "Yeah? What do you think?" "I think if you hadn't, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be me." Robert's eyes were glassy. "And I think if I hadn't, I would have missed out on one of the most important friendships of my life." There was silence for a moment. Then Daniel spoke again. "You ever wonder why it was me?" Robert nodded. "All the time. But I think maybe something greater than us put us in each other's path. Maybe it was never random. Maybe we were meant to find each other." That night, Daniel opened his journal, something he kept now, a habit Robert had suggested early on. He flipped to a fresh page and wrote just a few words. "One act of kindness can rewrite a lifetime of pain." It wasn't poetry. It wasn't polished, but it was true. Months later, Daniel was invited to speak at a national conference for mental health and homelessness. He stood on a brightly lit stage, wearing a suit Robert had gifted him months earlier. As he looked out at the crowd, policymakers, social workers, leaders, he didn't see power or politics. He saw people, and he began to speak. He told them that the issue wasn't just about money or policy. It was about recognition. It was about seeing the human being buried beneath the hardship, about treating every soul with dignity, no matter how broken they appeared. He said what saved me wasn't a shelter or a handout. It was someone who saw me, who stopped, who listened. The audience rose to their feet when he finished, but the applause wasn't for a speech. It was for a man who had been to the edge of nothingness and climbed his way back to love. That night, back at the hotel, Daniel called Robert. "I did it," he said. "I know," Robert replied. "I watched the live stream." Daniel laughed. "Was it good?" "It was perfect." A long pause. "Thank you, Robert," Daniel said quietly. "For what?" "For saving my life." There was silence again. Then Robert's voice came through, thick with emotion. "No, Daniel. Thank you for giving me mine back.